Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today on this CREST Careers Advice Evening. We've just got a few people joining at the moment, so we'll just give it a couple of seconds whilst everyone is actually coming on to the evening. So it's great. Thank you so much for those of you that have already joined us and are in the process of joining us. That is perfect as well. It's lovely to see everyone, and please feel free to ask any questions throughout this session as well. So just before we get started, I will be handing over to Adriana Costa McFadden, who is looking after the academic programme within CREST. So she will just talk in a few minutes about the evening. But before we get started, and Adriana will go over this as well, please feel free. This is your opportunity. We have some great people on here today that we will introduce you to shortly, and that will give you the opportunity to ask them any questions that you want to. So without me going on too many times and people still coming on, so thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to pass over to Adriana. So Adriana, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Debbie. Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, everybody. So I'm Adriana Costa McFadden, and I run the academic program for CREST. I would like to welcome you all tonight. It's great to see so many of you joining us. This is the second time we run this event. The first one was about a year ago, and it was a very popular event. So we are delighted to be hosting it for the second time. And as Debbie said, we have a fantastic lineup of presenters for you this evening. Each one of them has a wealth of experience in their respective areas. So they'll be talking about career pathways in their specific disciplines. And we're going to have a 45-minute Q&A session at the end. So don't forget to submit your questions. So I'd like to thank our panelists for their time this evening. And also I'd like to thank Debbie and her team at PRPR for organizing this webinar. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Boglar Caronto, Director of Operations at Comison. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adriana, and Debbie, and all of you arranging for this evening. So as I'm first, I just thought I would start with a little bit of a background story, and then hopefully convey some useful information to you all. So I kind of knew from about the time that I was 10 that I wanted to do something with computers when I was going to grow up. And kind of 15 years ago when I started my career, it was pretty tricky to get into IT. So I didn't at the time know that I was going to get into cyber. I just wanted to do something with computers. And kind of people had similar challenges to what you might sometimes read about online, in that kind of you try to apply for an entry-level job and you kind of have to demonstrate 5 years or more of experience and a master's degree, and if you don't have it, they'll just kind of look over you because there's so much competition. Now, I kind of genuinely believe that the situation is a little bit better in cyber today, and there's kind of a massive demand for security testers in particular. If I'm going to be mostly focusing on the pen test side of things, because I have been doing pen testing for over 10 years now, and that's kind of my comfort zone and my little domain. I head up the subcommittee for penetration testing at CREST, and I've been kind of going through a bit of a journey. I started off when I joined the company that I'm working for today. There was only 3 of us, and then the third person left about 2 months after I joined, so it was just 2 of us, and it was kind of a really good learning curve for me to get from that stage to kind of running a big business. But that's not the side that I want to focus on. It's more around the kind of the testing space and how you can get into doing some testing, because the competition is still pretty fierce, right? Where was I going with this? So I wanted to get into security, and I did this 2-semester course in cyber it was really brilliant. I had a fantastic mentor, a really nice chap that was kind of, he had this philosophy of kind of fake it until you make it. And he was really passionate about what he was doing. The course was really good. It went into all of the basics on infrastructure testing and web app testing. I knew nothing about all of that, so it was like a completely new area for me. And he was pretty big on getting people to think about building their confidence up and getting confident at what they do. So it was a 2-semester course, and by the time I got to the end of it, I felt genuinely like I was the best pen tester in the world, which is completely bonkers, because I was so far the depth to which that you can go when you start getting into cyber is like vast. If you've been in the industry for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and you still don't feel where that bottom is and how deep the pit is, you're probably on the right track. So, but it doesn't really matter. I was on the top of the world. I wanted to kind of go and do some security testing, and I went and did my first interview for a pen test role, and it went horribly bad. It was absolutely horrible. I didn't know at the time. It didn't feel like it. The people that I was speaking to were really nice. They were really kind. And obviously I didn't get the job at the end. And it's a very small industry. So a few months after, the word got around, and I was speaking to someone, and it turned out that some of the guys that were with that company that I interviewed for made fun of me internally, because I was this kind of young girl going into this interview, bold, and I thought I knew everything, and I knew nothing at all. And I think I kind of deserved, maybe not deserved being laughed at, but I could have probably done with some feedback on where I needed to improve and what I should have done or what I should have said. But it happened the way it happened, and looking back, like this was more than 10 years ago. Looking back, I actually think it helped me get on the right track, because it kind of taught me that it's not all just about confidence, right? So I then kind of started looking into myself a little bit and started to think about what I could do to make the next thing better, or make it happen, or to allow myself to get into the industry. And like I said, I didn't have pointers, so I was just trying to figure it out for myself. And I started doing side projects. I started doing things that could genuinely demonstrate my skills. Like I wrote these long one-liners in Bash as a shell script, and kind of tried to submit that along my CV to kind of make things stand out. You know, I didn't. I wanted to demonstrate that I had the kind of relevant skills and all. And I think I had to go through probably another 4 or 5 interviews until I was closer to where I needed to be, in terms of tuning in my expectations and my level of experience, and finding the right people that were kind of open to listening to someone that may or may not have potential, and were willing to kind of give me that credit to see, you know, give me an opportunity to actually test myself out. And then kind of one of the things that I took away from that is that it was really important for me. I felt that it was useful for me to have that mentor during the cyber course, but it wasn't enough. I think what I should have done in retrospect was speak to more peers, more people in the industry. But being an introvert, it was really not my thing. I think if I were to do it now, I would probably go on LinkedIn, maybe approach a couple of people that seem to be, you know, in the positions that I'm interested in. Maybe they're already working for a business in the role that I'm aiming for, or maybe they're some business leaders. You know, I can probably go out on the limb and say that that if you were to message anyone on the pen test subcommittee, and genuinely just say, you know, look, I'm looking for some advice, I think you'll get responses. So don't shy away from doing that, and I think that would have really helped. There's the one difference that I see now in the industry compared to when I started is that there's a lot more companies, especially in the UK, that are now trying to create these academy programs for people that are wanting to join the industry, because there is demand for testing. It's not going to be easy. It's still going to be a pretty tricky journey. It's going to be a steep learning curve, but you can find these programs, join the companies that run these programs, and then kind of test yourself as much as prove to yourself and to your kind of employer that this is the right decision for you, because not everyone is necessarily going to have to end up being a tester. You think you might want to do testing, and you could end up in an analyst role or in an engineering role and be just awesome at it. Don't doubt yourself too much. Just try as many things as you think you need to test yourself, look at it, and kind of think about your journey and think about how you're going on. And in terms of this confidence thing, I think it is important that you kind of build your own confidence. You want to be able to demonstrate that you can do an interview and you can speak to people, but kind of stay humble at the same time, and just be open and honest and say, you know, this is maybe not an area that I've tried before, or I've tried this and this, but I understand that I've got some more room to grow. Speak to people, speak to peers, kind of don't be afraid to punch above your weight. I think it's all of these things adding up. I'm kind of listening to myself. I think it's really tricky, or it can be tricky to find the right balance, but that's what you're aiming for. So don't really try and be too far into one direction. Try and find the kind of the zen on your journey, and hopefully it will work. And people like myself, people that are on this call, we're here to kind of help you and get you through those tricky situations. Practice the situations that are not entirely in your comfort zone, because it helps when it comes to demonstrate that you have to really kind of stand up and speak. So kind of overall, looking back, I think some of those early failures that I had really helped me to understand what I needed to do better, and where I needed to change or tune things. And then once you kind of get on the ladder, and if you're genuinely passionate about what you do, there's nothing that can stop you. You will just carry on, and it won't even feel like learning. It won't even feel like a career, because it will just be so natural, and you just do one test after the other, or one assignment or one project after the other, and you will just keep packing on all of that knowledge, and hopefully enjoy every little bit of it. So I think it may not have been a fully comprehensive story, but hopefully I was able to convey a couple of little bits to make you think. And looking forward to the Q&A after the session. Back to you, Adriana.
Thank you, Boglaka. So I'll be handing over to Debbie now. Debbie?
That's great. Thank you very much for those insights, Boglaka. And I think that probably just gives you a bit of an overview, really, there about, not blocking off any of those pathways. So as we go through and you hear from everybody else, and you try and take on that knowledge in the different areas that you're going to hear about today, then it gives you a bit of an oversight. And obviously, I have seen that a couple of people have put questions in the the Q&A pane, so thank you very much for those. I am noting them down so that I make sure that I keep them under the right people that were presenting, so when I'm firing these questions out, and then anybody else can obviously sort of answer from their point of view. But I will now be handing over to Matt Lorenzen, who is the principal consultant at Cybris. So Matt's going to be focusing on if you are looking at a career, intelligence-led penetration testing, and he'll be sort of focusing on that and offensive security, and telling you a little bit about his journey as well into where he's got to today. So thank you very much, Matt, and over to you.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So I realised, reflecting in preparation for this call, that I've actually been working in IT for quite a while now, 25 years actually. My route into the industry was that I finished my A-levels, and at that time there wasn't really the concept of an ethical hacking degree or computer science degrees that I was particularly interested in. So I actually went straight into industry. And what that resulted in was a position in a secondary school, actually. So I really started at the ground up. I became an IT technician, and I learned about networking and infrastructure and sort of day-to-day Windows system administrator. So I would say probably that was my first start, was understanding specifically Windows networks and kind of being on the coal face of managing users. You know, students tend to be quite hostile users, so it's a good proving ground even in those early days of understanding security for me. And I kind of just like pushed through the role essentially, and couldn't learn enough, and realized that there was gaps, and sort of looked at qualifications that I could do. So I did a lot of the Microsoft certified systems administrator and engineer courses, things like that. After that, I thought it would be good if I set up my own company. So I ran an IT consultancy in Northamptonshire, where I live, and I did that for 7 years, and that was a really good, very stressful, challenging period in my career. Certainly getting out there and learning to set up business, and the concept of business has certainly helped me further on in my career. You know, it's customer facing. A lot of what we do, and you'll hear this, I think, from other speakers, is you know, we're interfacing with customers, and we're dealing with problems that customers need support through. So developing good consultancy skills is necessary in being able to sort of fulfill day-to-day roles essentially. And you need to have kind of maybe a self-directed learning type approach. You need to be interested and willing to sort of look at new skills and absorb those new skills, often in your own time. It's not always possible to kind of continue to progress within work day-to-day commitments. And so, you know, that passion for the role and that really wanting to invest in those skills is key to be able to continue to progress and succeed. You know, looking at where the industry is also going is a good thing. You know, not trying to be stagnated, and looking at types of things that you would need to absorb. Really, there's so much. I would say the challenge now is that there is so much information out there that people can gain access to in terms of learning, that it's often difficult at times to be able to find out what would be good places to absorb stuff. You know, do you need to learn every single programming language that's out there, or is it better to invest your time in becoming quite proficient in a specific language, and you know, use that as your kind of primary driver? These are questions and things that you kind of explore, and whilst you need to have knowledge of other areas, it's always good to try and elevate your skills so that you can become proficient. So for example, in Windows system administration land, learning PowerShell is a must, and so understanding that and investing in those skills early on is going to help you progress through there. And there's as I said, there's lots of good resources. Microsoft provide a lot of good resources for that sort of stuff, so there's always opportunities. It's just knowing where to focus on that. So infrastructure is my first love. So red teaming was a natural progression for me, really. I've been around the CREST track for quite a while now. I think I've been CREST certified for about 10 years. And so the infrastructure examinations, red teaming as a progression of that was a natural place for me to go to. And I was always interested in that idea of what it is to sort of perform these types of attacks. And so intelligence-led pen testing is a term that gets thrown around quite a lot. I said, to me, essentially, it's red teaming. That's what it is. But really, the intelligence piece of it is looking at, well, what's happening in the real world, and how can we kind of emulate those. And so for me, like looking at breach reports and, you know, common tactics that get there that are getting shared, a good understanding of things like the MITRE attack framework, all of those things have helped me to be able to sort of progress through that. And it's important to remember, really, that in red teaming, what we're trying to do is test and assess a set of security controls. I would say that in pen testing, it's a lot about coverage, as much coverage as possible, and trying to find various avenues and issues that need to be addressed immediately. I would say more red teaming is goal orientated. And you're probably not going to have the opportunity and the time to explore every specific attack path that could be available. So from that perspective, it's, well, what is the pathway to achieving the objective in the best possible fashion? And how, as we go through that chain of events, or that striving towards that goal, how can we test various security controls that are in place to be able to understand whether a customer can detect that sort of stuff. It is hacking to be caught, in a sense, trying to determine where that threshold actually is. A lot of the time, I think, you know, the idea is that you perform an engagement and you shouldn't really ever be detected, and that's, you know, that is sometimes that is a goal, to understand where the gaps are, but you know, you have to be able to tune that to meet the customer objectives. It's also a very fast moving area of IT, particularly cat and mouse, because as new techniques emerge, you know, they're quickly squashed. And I would say, with the advent of cloud-based environments that many more people are using now and building platforms on, some of these techniques are fairly short-lived. And so, you know, for me, it's caused me to have a much deeper introspection of the types of parts of Windows, particularly, that I wouldn't have, you know, and I've touched on malware development and understanding lower levels of the Windows environment in ways that I probably wouldn't have before. And a lot of that is through trying to understand red team objectives and capabilities there. So inevitably, you're going to find, when you try and walk towards that as a career path, that there's going to be gaps in your knowledge, and you're going to have to continually sort of adapt to those and constantly chase the carrot, essentially. So if you're fine with that, and you're the sort of person that really enjoys learning and like to spend time and invest time in yourself picking up new skills, and you want to know how things work, then certainly things like red teaming are a really good exercise for that. It's also important to know the types of tools and, you know, the risks that you have in delivering some of this sort of stuff. So for that, like building labs and having environments where you can practice skill sets is something that I'm a real strong believer in, and I've released a lot of tools around trying to make these environments realistic, so that when we're practicing and we're developing skills, that we're actually developing them in a real world mindset. I always had problems with, like, when you would watch somebody doing a walkthrough of something, they would say, oh, well, in the real world I'd never do this, but because I'm here I'm going to do that. For example, I'm not going to bother worrying about antivirus or stuff, and you know, if you build in that type of mentality, it can hold you back. So it's always best to just think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and as much as possible orientate your learning to make that as real world as possible. I would say knowing both sides of the discipline, if you will, the red team and the blue team side of things, is so important these days. And just sort of, for me, I kind of feel like the role now has evolved to where you sit in the middle and you have the capability to deliver offensive type tradecraft, but you also have an understanding as to where the detections are. And that's not to say that everything you do is never going to leave logs and etc. You know, it just depends on whether people are actually looking at them. So it's understanding what your actions actually mean in terms of an environment. But it's important to remember that we aren't criminals. And so, I mean, sometimes that can be a bit of a frustrating part of it, because you know that if you're emulating an APT group, that there wouldn't be the concern for the customer's environment in the same way. So that can sometimes be frustrating, but it's important to remember that we are simulating these types of attacks for customers in order that they can understand where those detections of threshold really are. You know, we have to be careful when we look at attacking users. There's a fine line in terms of that. So just kind of this knowledge, this experience that you can build up around thinking about sort of consultancy and how you interface with customers, and talking through these types of things with customers is really quite important. I think it's fair to say that at the end of the day, like, customers don't really care about the shell screenshot. We as testers become very narrow focused on, you know, that exploitation and whether it's possible to achieve that chain of events, and that's great. And I think that's the allure of the job. It's that deep understanding of technical aspects of computing, and there's nothing cooler than being around other pen testers, because you can actually have really in-depth conversations. And so I think you'll find early on in your careers that you will end up sort of working with other teams. For me, my first jobs, as I said to you before, I got vendor qualifications, and then within my company I was looking at jobs that were orientated around security. So I went and passed the Tiger Scheme, the QSTM Tiger Scheme qualifications, and that essentially meant that I put my CV into places like HP, and essentially they were like, okay, yeah, that's great, you know, you've got those, passed the technical assessments. And that was really the beginning of me kind of moving from being my own company into the journey into this environment. After that, I worked at Spider Labs for about 4 years with some really technical people across the world, actually. Traveled a lot. So, you know, that was great in one sense, challenging in another, young family, etc. But really, I think throughout my career, it's always been learning through and by osmosis, by you know, in synergy with other testers. I learned a lot sitting on data center floors next to people that I would look up to as mentors at the time. And, you know, that is one way that you can kind of build your skill set. So looking at the people that you interact with and how you can support each other on that journey is really important. And I'm a big fan of mentoring. I think that it's a really important aspect of the development cycle, really. And as Bob Larker said, lots of these companies now, as included, have you know, academy programs where we can bring people in and actually teach them the skills that they need to do the job. Because I've worked within mentoring programs for a while, and even people that come in with, you know, qualifications and computer science degrees, etc., way more qualifications than I have in specific areas, what they miss or what they lack is some of that real world experience, some of that understanding as to sort of real world IT management and some of the challenges that customers face. And so if you can sort of backfill some of that for yourself, then you're certainly going to put yourself in a much stronger position when it comes to sort of moving into trying to get roles. If you can demonstrate that you could build an Active Directory environment, whether it's on premise or in the cloud, or you've got strong Linux skills, you've got understanding in those areas, it's going to be important. It's also worth remembering, as I said, that technology changes. So focusing on how things are different and how you can build up skills in that is very important. That was a bit of a self-appraisal of myself a couple of years ago, where I could see that everything was migrating to the cloud, and I didn't really feel very that I had many strong technical capabilities in those areas. So around my work, I've been taking vendor qualifications, AWS certifications and stuff, to try and really understand the technology, so that then I can understand, well, if I know how it works and I know how it's deployed, maybe I can find ways to circumvent some of those controls, or at least be aware of in my actions within those environments. So I think in summary, I think it's the best career that you could have. I absolutely love my job. I know lots of people that don't like their jobs, and I feel quite quite sorry for them. I genuinely love the technical challenges of what I do. I like the customer facing and the interactivity side of things. I like taking a project from the beginning point and seeing it all the way through to the end. I don't actually mind reporting either, which is good. I see that as very much a sort of a wrap up of the whole experience. It's fast paced. And it can be exhausting at times, and the expectation is that you really drive yourself forward. That can be quite a challenge as you progress through your career, but if you can maintain that sort of level, then I think you'll be very successful, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Debbie or Adriana.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you very much there, Matt, and very insightful. And whilst you've been talking away, we've been having lots of questions in. So we have got quite a few questions to get through at the end. So as we're running a little bit ahead of time, I'm going to keep going so that we can make sure we get as many of those questions answered for you at the end of this session. So I'm now going to hand over to Matt Lorenzen, who is Head of Defensive Security at JumpSec, and Matt's going to be talking about incident response and obviously the background of how he sort of got into the role, and an overview of the importance of the role within the industry. So over to you, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Debbie. You just made the elementary mistake with 2 Matt L's on the call.
Oh, have I done it again?
Yeah, you've done it again.
You know what? I apologies to everybody, because I said I was probably going to do this, and yeah, two Matt L's has really confused me. It doesn't take a lot, in fairness. So yeah, so Matt Lawrence, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. And I agree. So far, it's been incredibly insightful, even from my perspective as well. So, listen, I've thought a lot about what I can really say here in 15 minutes to an audience like this that's going to be beneficial for you. I come to you to speak, I guess, about incident response and kind of what that looks like. But what I thought is, like, first of all, the world is in quite a strange place at the moment. Obviously, we're in a recession again, and I'm somebody who graduated into the last major recession, and faced all the difficulties that brought. And I just want to kind of stress to you all that the economic climate is temporary, and generally, if you look back through history, the world economy is on a trajectory of boom and bust, and it's a regular thing. And as messy as things seem like now, the situation will improve quite rapidly. And if my story is anything to go by, it should be no impediment to your ability to succeed. So if anything, you might have to work a little bit harder to get roles at the outset, but you'll likely be stronger for it. As I say, I graduated into the recession, and through that, a couple of opportunities that I'd sort of lined up evaporated. I graduated with a computer science degree. I did a sandwich course, which is, for those that aren't aware, where you kind of, as part of your degree, you do a year in industry. That was an incredibly useful year, actually. I've seen a few questions about imposter syndrome and things like that, which I'm sure we'll get to a little bit later. But having that year for me was really important, because it kind of got me through some of the more terrifying things of starting a new job, or your first proper job. Things like, you get a desk phone, or we used to back then anyway, and that rings for the first time, and you have kittens, and then within a few weeks your phone's ringing all the time, and you just get used to it. And I think that's kind of a good sign for kind of any job, really. Things that seem really intimidating from the outside, once you kind of get involved and figure it out, you get used to it. I suppose that really speaks to the human experience really. But I spent in that year in industry, I spent 3 months shredding financial records. So it wasn't really kind of technically insightful. It didn't put me ahead in terms of technical capability. There was some IT stuff once I'd proven my shredding capabilities. And I remember thinking at the time, like, what the hell is this? Like, I thought I was coming to do something really technical and use my first 2 years of my degree for something really useful and kind of, put my imprint on the company I was going to be working for. But when I look back, it was a very humbling experience and actually taught me a lot about kind of about work and how to succeed, in terms of sometimes you are asked to do tasks that are ostensibly boring, and your attitude towards the task and most notably other people is often the thing that can really set you apart. I did eventually graduate and end up in industry. As I say, the first roles, I had a couple of graduate schemes I'd lined up. I thought I was going to be a PHP programmer when I graduated. I spent part of my time at uni building an e-commerce platform that had become reasonably successful. It was kind of like a sideline money earner, really, back when you needed to have things like e-commerce platforms, which obviously there are a few still today, but not to the same sort of level that the market was back then. But essentially, my first step really on my career was I made a choice of following money, which some people would perhaps disagree with. But I took a job on an IT service desk because it was a little bit of extra money more than the sort of low-level PHP programmer role I could find at that time. As I say, partly down to the economic climate there, but again, when I look back, it was a incredibly good decision. Actually, I was very lucky. You sometimes make a lot of daft decisions when you're younger. Well, that was a daft decision, really, made for the wrong reasons, that turned out in my favor, because I spent through that particular job, I learned a great deal about IT, about dealing with people, about solving problems. And luckily for me, the organization I was working for, I suppose partly down to the economic climate and the lack of ability to hire more and more people, it meant that I had an opportunity to quite quickly progress from that service desk and become a sysadmin, and I was managing kind of Microsoft Exchange infrastructures, working on things like the Windows XP upgrade and things like that back in the day, which is a long and distant memory these days, which is quite terrifying in many respects. My route into incident response came more through, again, through luck more than judgment. I was enjoying my IT career. I'd become responsible for patching the estate that I was working in. The IT estate, I should say, was around about 30,000 users, so it wasn't a small campus network by any regard. So you learn a lot working at that scale, and essentially, part of my role, I become responsible for patching the beast. So naturally, then I became the authority on security in that organization. But quite frankly, I knew nothing, Jon Snow. I was just patching away. But inevitably, that organization experienced an incident because I was seen as the authority, because I was the patching guy. I was handed this thing to deal with, and kind of having a go at that, and I guess leading my very first investigation infected me with pardon the pun, infected me with a passion that has never left me. I've heard it said that instant response is incredibly addictive, and I do tend to agree. Really, though, the crux of instant response is really becoming comfortable in the deep end. IR is not a theoretical mode of security. It's not security research. It's not even, you know, obviously it's not offensive security, but it's not I should say it's not as controlled as, say, like an offensive security engagement. Instant response is about dealing with real life, with real people, with real crisis, with real attackers. And if you really want to have an impact and experience some of the real world, it may be that instant response is for you. You'll also find, and if I do say so myself, some of the best people you'll ever meet will be in the instant response industry. Of course, I'm biased, but also naturally some of the best teams, because often the best teams are built through adversity, and when you're constantly dealing with what can often be wide-scale incidents, and dealing with crisis on behalf of others, it really does foster the best teams. One of sort of the best compliments I've ever seen of an instant response team was from a dude who was ex-armed forces, and he said at the time his particular instant response team felt like a brother / sisterhood, to the same degree that they'd felt that they particularly felt in the armed forces, which I think was an incredible thing to hear from somebody who'd experienced such things. In terms of my further career, then dealt with some incidents. I worked. I then was fortunate enough to get speaking to a guy I didn't realize was the chairman of an aerospace and defense company, and we had at the time a shared interest about a particular piece of malware, and it just so happened to be that that company was looking for a security guy at the time, and at the end of this conversation, he gave me the opportunity to come down to London from Yorkshire and meet with his team, and they very graciously offered me a job as I guess their security analyst at the time. What I then uncovered is they'd been attacked by a nation state actor, and what my job really was there was going in and figuring out what had happened, why it had happened, and how they could protect against it. Again, for me personally, luck playing a really big factor there, but I'm also a big believer in you make your own luck, and in particular, I think had I not treated this gentleman with respect and curiosity, we'd have never got into a conversation really, and the opportunity would never have arisen. So I think it's a really important indicator to me, and something again that has stuck with me ever since, is that the importance of respecting people and treating people well. You'd be surprised at the impact that can have on your career. Sometimes, and a mentor of mine described this to me as kind of like, if you think your life as a snooker table. It's chance meetings, like between like a cue ball and a red ball can completely change the trajectory of your career and indeed your life. So it's really important to be ready at any moment for the unexpected, and always be willing to take that opportunity. And that's something that's really stuck with me, and I think has really stood me in good stead for an incident response career. It's funny going through this story in my head the other night. It also made me think about incident response because you know, any sort of any incident, when you kind of trace it back, when you find the root cause and you break it down into what the attack was able to achieve, it often looks like a really graceful story, but actually the blood, sweat and tears and the reality of it is often very different. And I think that's very much the same in any sort of career, really. And it is the essentially the passion that you have for what you're doing, which will see you through that. And it in my mind is the really important thing on multiple levels, really. I'm afraid to say it, but things like degrees and certifications are generally just a basic education. And that's not to denigrate them or anything. It's to say that and it is having done one myself, it is a fantastic opportunity and growth opportunity to do any form of academic qualification or certification. But underlying that has to be your passion for what you're doing. And that's not just about getting ahead, really. I think you've got to realize you know, it is a real joy in life to be able to do something that you're passionate about. It is actually quite rare, really, in the grand scheme of things, to be able to follow your passion. But it is ever so important. And if you're not passionate about something, you've got to ask yourself, why are you doing it in the first place? Because it's that passion, that sort of personal vendetta, that personal mission that will see you through those long hours. You know, I was smiling when other Matt was talking about sort of lots of travel and lots of late nights and lots of dedication out of hours. It's the things that you don't see successful people do, but ultimately the source of that is a real sort of keen passion for what we're doing, and kind of then the perspective that we achieve, particularly when the difficult moments come. That passion, that guiding light, that mission can really see you through. I just want to kind of bring this to kind of a close here by trying to give you some really specific advice about incident response in particular. So, you know, I think you'll find in the industry there will be plenty of incident response roles available, and they may well be entry-level positions in a multitude of organizations. So if you're lucky enough to pick up an entry-level position working either for a company that provides incident response directly, or perhaps working with an organization in an incident response role, you're perhaps one of the lucky ones. You know, but if you do fancy an incident response career and you're not lucky enough to get an entry-level position, don't necessarily let that stop you. You know, sometimes you've got to take a roundabout route to get where you want to be, and there's no you know, and actually it'd be a great benefit to you to get a little bit more more perspective, perhaps first before entering something like incident response. That can come from anything. Often you see on job descriptions, it'll say things like SOC analyst experience or IT experience preferred. And of course, both of those things are good routes in. Why? Because IT will give you a good grounding in what the reality of IT is in the real world. SOC analysts, something similar, but it'll also give you sort of some analytical knowledge and understanding, which will certainly be helpful in incident response. But you needn't just limit yourself to those two areas. You know, practically anything can provision you with really key skills that will help you have a long and fruitful incident response career. Because when you're faced with an incident, you simply cannot predict what you're going to face. Often you're facing technology that you know, may be coming across for the very first time, and then it's your job as an incident responder to figure out what you can do with it. Our job is to figure out what the attacker has done, to figure out how they got in, figure out the steps they took whilst they were in the network system, cloud infrastructure, whatever it may be, figure out how to get rid of them, and also ultimately figure out how to stop the situation from happening again. And I think kind of one of the best incident response movies is probably Apollo 13, where, you know, they're facing destruction of their craft, and all they have is some duct tape, string, and a whole bunch of hope. Incident response can often feel like that, but being able to fall back onto first principles and a varying degree of knowledge is really important. And it is really an area where the best teams are built on diversity of thinking. So there is, quite frankly, you know, any kind of experience. And I'm not necessarily talking about go and spend 10 years doing something. It might be something that you've already been doing as you've been studying, or otherwise, can really help you. One of the big things I do these days, because I'm not so much in the technical weeds myself, is you know, obviously in a big crisis, you know, stress and pressure can be a real sort of experience for organizations. Imagine a business that you've built and you wake up and it's been ransomware. You know, it can be, you know, we're often coming across people on the worst days of their careers, sometimes worst days of their life, unfortunately, if the situation warrants it. So an ability, for example, to deal with people, to project manage, to do a whole range of things under that can be incredibly important. So, you know, things where you can you know, deal with customers, and perhaps you've got some experience of customer service in your back pocket. All of these things can stand you in good stead. There's no kind of certification, it's easy for me to say, that I can sort of lay out that will give you the skills you need, but really a little bit of everything is useful. And if you do fancy working on the front lines and dealing with real incidents, real attackers, real people and real defenders, it might be that the incident response is for you. There's so much more to say here, but in the danger of using all the time, I'll pass back to Debbie, because I'm sure there's some really interesting things to come from the other speakers. But I am happy to answer any questions that you may have at the end here in the Q&A.
Oh, that's great, Matt. And thank you very much for everything that you've said there. And I'm glad you said that you were going to answer some questions, because we're now up to a lot of questions. So get ready for the end of this session for that question and answer session. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to pass over to Andy Flood and to Oliver Fay as well. Now, Andy is the lead cyber threat intelligence consultant at Netitude, and Oliver is the technical lead of threat intelligence team at Context. So I will hand over to both of them to give you a little bit of an insight into threat intelligence and how they came to be where they are today. So thank you very much to you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. And good to see you again, Andy. I think we're the only two on this call who are going to do a little bit of a tag team in terms of giving a little overview of where and how we came to the career. I've known Andy for a fair while now. Despite us being with different organizations, we tend to move in the same circles. There's a lot of that within the threat intelligence space. It's a relatively small community, and a lot of people know each other from a variety of different areas. That's kind of one of the key areas and one of the key focus points from my perspective to try and draw out as part of this session. One of the and that kind of that area of particular noteworthiness, I think, from CTI, potentially more than some of those other bits within the cybersecurity landscape, is actually how unbelievably diverse some of the backgrounds of a lot of the folk who we find working in the industry are. So I'll give a little bit of an intro to myself and a little bit of an overview of how I found myself in my position, and then I'll hand over to Andy to cover off from the same side there. So as Debbie's already introduced, Ollie Fay, I look after the technical aspects of cyber threat intelligence for context information security. What that means in reality is a lot of doing some of the things that Matt and the IR folk have also spoken a little bit about. So tracking adversaries, looking at and pulling apart malware, adversary tooling, infrastructure, supporting a lot of the work that they do within that incident response space with up-to-date intelligence on what the bad guys are doing, how they're doing it, who they're targeting, and why. I mentioned diversity in this community, and I think kind of my own background is a good example of that. So I first came into the cybersecurity world just over 10 years ago now. I came in a more incident response aligned role, actually, in the initial parts of my career. And I came in with almost no technical expertise or understanding at all. I'd gone through kind of an academic pathway. So I'd done an undergraduate in international relations. I'd done a master's degree. One of our previous commentators, I think it was it was one of the two Matts, mentioned the Great Recession back in the years of kind of 2008. I was in a similar situation to him in that I came out of my undergraduate degree in the midst of that Great Recession. Coming out into the recession with a humanities and social sciences degree, not the best decision in my life in hindsight. Probably would have gone for something a little bit more technical, knowing the direction my career had taken. I worked a number of odd jobs for about a year and a half before settling on deciding to do a master's degree. I did a master's degree in intelligence and security studies. So one of the aspects of my undergraduate that I particularly enjoyed was looking at the kind of what we call in threat intelligence the strategic, the kind of state level, why and how states behave and threaten each other, conflict and peace, all of that really kind of high level geopolitical stuff. So I'd had an interest in going into the geopolitical space. I did a master's degree in security studies. That gave me a little bit of opportunity to kind of first explore the cybersecurity area, although from a very different perspective than the way I ended up working in it. So I'd spent a bit of time, particularly working in my university, my master's dissertation, looking at cybersecurity threats, but from a government lens. So looking at government policy and how governments were addressing cybersecurity challenges. I had a very unusual kind of move into the technical cybersecurity realm where I've spent the last 10 years. In that, I went for a job interview with an aerospace and defense consultancy company, in fact, who didn't offer me the job I was going for, but the managing director of the company in question came up to me after 2 days worth of interviews and various sessions and said, "We are doing a little bit of work, or we're building out a Pathfinder project in the cybersecurity space. Would you like to be involved in it?" So the first year of my cybersecurity career, very much a baptism by fire. I set up my own limited company. I ended up doing what I would describe these days as reconnaissance and targeting and intelligence collection for red teaming activity, so that penetration testing piece. Also a little bit of what's called physical pen test as well, so doing physical reconnaissance, supporting those pen test activities, but by no means kind of really technically aligned. I kind of fell into the incident response aspect of information security first of all. So I spent the first, I think, 5 years of my career at Context as an incident responder. Came in very, very green with almost no technical understanding. The first 6 months of my career were basically learning TCP/IP back to front, because most of the work we were doing at that time, kind of 2012-ish, 2011, 2012-ish, that was mostly network, what we described then as network intrusion detection. So we were monitoring organizations' networks for signs of those particularly sophisticated nation state threat actors who like to target networks of national significance. My kind of academic background, with a little bit of a lean more towards the geopolitical, then started coming into the fore, and I ended up getting more and more involved in adversary tracking activities. So picking up some of those key threat groups, tracking them over time, assessing how they're targeting, their tooling and their approaches change. It was on the back of that I kind of took that transition over into the CTI space. And over the last few years, I've done a number of roles in that, most recently looking after a lot of our UK and Ireland focused CTI activities, and leading up across our organization, leading up our research practice. So where those efforts go in tracking various adversaries, going back to doing some more of that technical nitty gritty, as well as the organizational operational management. Before I hand over to Andy, I'll just leave with a particular thought and observation, going back to what I said a little bit earlier about diversity within the threat intelligence landscape. I look at my team now, team of 10 who kind of who I work with on a day-to-day basis, and I look at other people within within my organization and in other organizations as well. And one of the kind of key characteristics I see across them is there is a huge amount of diversity in the backgrounds that all those people come from. We've got mathematics graduates, we've got people with English literature degrees, we've got a couple of people similar backgrounds to myself who've come in from the kind of geopolitics and international relations world. We've got people who've done technical undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in information security and those sorts of things. We've got people who've come from non-academic backgrounds entirely, somebody who was an ex-telecommunications engineer, people who've come from armed forces or law enforcement. There is a huge amount of variety in the CTI landscape. One thing I think is a unifying factor for all of us who find ourselves in it for prolonged periods of time, really enjoy and engage with threat intelligence, is it's that inquisitiveness, it's that desire to, whether you're working in the strategic, the operational, the tactical space, to pull stuff apart, to develop a more detailed understanding, to pull threads and see how things unravel, to think laterally, think outside the box and challenge conceptions and ideas throughout that life cycle. And I'll hand over to Andy now to give a little bit of an introduction from his side.
Thank you very much, Ollie. So yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Andy Flood, a lead TI consultant at Netitude. I got into the industry in a little bit different way to most of the others. I came from the military side of things. I spent 14 years with the Royal Marines. 10 of those were involved in intelligence analysis and collection. And it got to the stage where, for me, warfare was changing. I didn't want to I didn't see a future in it inside the military. So for me, everything was going down the cyber type route. And I thought, I'm finding this really interesting, and actually there's a potential of using some of those skill sets that we've built up, the analytical skill sets, over a period of time, in the military to using them in a civilian sort of sector. And that's how I kind of worked my way into cyber, and I've been doing it nearly 4 years now. So for me, the sort of the things that I find interesting with it is, and some of the assumptions that people make about it, I probably sit more in the less technical side of TI, as opposed to sort of the malware reverse engineering, all the other type of stuff that goes on, the infrastructure analysis that Ollie gets into. I spend a lot of my time doing the recon work for intelligence-led pen testing, so looking at organizations, predominantly financial services, some in telecom, some in government and other places, and saying, okay, I'm a threat actor, how am I going to target this particular organization? And then working through the steps, I'm going to look through the people. Who, if I was, am I going to take a spear phishing route? Who am I going to target? What type of ruse is going to work to be able to get into this organization? People are always the soft underbelly of organizations, and that's a great way in if you understand how to not manipulate people, but how to apply your influence to them to get them to do something that would help you into the organization. I think looking at the industry and explaining TI, I think it fits into 3 pillars for me. So you've got vendors, consultancies, and end users, and that kind of breaks the industry down quite nicely, and it affects the way that you view the industry as well. End user organizations, the enterprises or other organizations that have a TI capability and need it, they will spend most of their time looking from the inside, where they understand what they look like. They will be spending it looking out to the world and understanding what threats are out there and what they're likely to face. Consultancies kind of sit in the middle and go, okay, we know what we're ourselves, we're going to approach this organization in terms of doing a test or from an attacking perspective, and we want to understand what it looks like from the inside, from the outside perspective. So I'm going to do all my tools for enumerating the perimeter. I'm going to, if there is a way in through the perimeter, can I see anything that openly identifies it as having vulnerabilities, for example? Is there something that I could, another attack vector I could get into there somehow, with the core understanding of trying to see what it looks like on the inside from that perspective. And then the other part of the industry, the other third of it, is the vendors that kind of sit roughly across the middle, and they're just looking across. They want to look at what's happening in the world and make something that's useful for a client to come and buy, whether that's from the consultancies or the end users. So that kind of breaks that down quite nicely. When interviewing people, what I look for the most, especially at the lower levels, and I know I've seen some of the comments already, it's really hard to find entry-level positions into the industry, and it's a real pain point, and it's definitely something that I'm aware of and we're trying to do something about. I know because we're looking at going down some of the apprenticeship schemes and everything else in the future, and I think there is a lack of opportunity at the bottom. Everyone talks about a skills gap, and it's not, with the skills gaps in the middle somewhere. Actually, there's a whole host of people like yourselves that are wanting to join the industry, and we should be able to take advantage of that. But at the minute, it just seems organizations don't appear overly receptive for that, or they put barriers in the way that you need certain amount of experience, qualifications, or anything else. The biggest tip I suppose I've got from analyzing a lot of CVs that land on my desk and from going through the interviewing process with people is, they'll fire off a CV towards a job, but they won't explain why they're most suitable to it. So if it's a common one, I'm looking for an analyst that sits in, looks what's happening in the media, and they go, okay, this is important, this is affecting a lot of our clients, are we going to push out a message to be able to do with it? But actually, when they're applying for it, they're telling me they're a pen tester or something else for it, and it's like, well, that's not immediately relevant to me. I'm going to have to do a couple of jumps to maybe say, is this person going to be appropriate for my team or anything else? If you can cut down the amount of jumps someone's got to make in your opening paragraph, I am an analyst that's used to doing X, Y, and Z. Perfect. This person's already on my list that I'm going to take forward off that initial review. I potentially want to talk to you and then show why they should come and work for our organization. And that's the other one. So I don't often expect, especially at the entry level, no one's going to expect you to know everything, and there's not a full depth that you're going to need to show in terms of technical knowledge or people knowledge. It's how do you get across that you have a passion for the industry and you want to work in it? And most of the time that will come across when you're talking to people. Tell me about a couple of events recently or attacks on organizations that you've seen, and how did it take place? And a lot of people will just go quiet, and it's like, well, for me, if my job is to try and replicate attacks against organizations, I'd expect someone to look at it and go, actually, I saw, let's go back a little while, I saw Conti do this, Black Bastard ransomware group recently did this. I thought it was interesting because they use these TTPs according to a report from so and so to get past the perimeter, and then they use these techniques for this particular malware or something else. Just the conversation should flow, and you should be able to get across that you have a passion for it and you're widely read on a subject. And I think that comes into some of the questions we're asking, what tools you can use to stay ahead of what's happening in the landscape. Now, for myself, I think I put in the answer, I'm a big fan of Feedly, actually. I only started using it a couple of months ago. They've got various levels. The free one is Suffice, and it's a great aggregator that pulls together a load of different resources. Whether you're interested in pen testing, you can put technical resources into it. It will look for people if you're GRC focused, from the governance, risk and compliance, defensive stuff, APT activity, and it all pulls it in one place. And then you go through it, you can see exactly what's happening, you refresh it on however often you want to, pull new articles into it, and you can save the ones that you're interested in onto certain boards to be able to review later. So, okay, I've got a ransomware board, I've got a supply chain board. These are all pertinent to types of scenarios that we push forward for testing when we're doing organizations. So having it all in one place, I think Feedly is fantastic. Cyware's social is another good one as well. And again, you don't have to pay for this stuff. There's a number of sort of aggregators out there, and just force yourself to read every day. First, half an hour, if you've got an hour of luxury, something as soon as once you're having your breakfast, okay, what's gone on in the world? Let's look at it and go, oh, that's interesting. Cyberwire used to be a good one. I don't know if they're still going. You can have it again. It's different ways of digesting it. They do emails. There's like a podcast or an audio sort of readout for it as well, if that's more your thing. So again, loads of resources out there. Just read widely, read deeply, and just form your opinions on it, because that's what we're looking for ideally. We've also got to be conscious of time, be aware of not falling into just reading the news at people. TI is about going that extra step most of the time as well. So don't just repeat the headlines at me. The question you should always be asking, so what? What does it mean to me or the people I want to work for or a client that I'm potentially dealing with? What are the outcomes from this? Have a go at practicing writing like threat reports, for example. There's a load of good reports that come out when a new vulnerability is released, for example. There's a lot of proof of concept code. There's active exploitation. Practice pulling together your own report over 4 or 5 different other sources that come into that, and then make your recommendations at the end of it. Get used to writing that report. Make complex topics really easy for people to digest and go through, and that will stand you in a really good stead. Okay, this is what I know about this particular vulnerability. This is the bluff, that bottom line. What do I need to know about it if I've got to run off and do something to be able to know something else to follow? Okay, what's the background to it? How did it get there? What mitigations can I do within my estate to be able to minimize my exposure to this particular vulnerability? Just think of all these steps. Think of the journey that a customer has to go through or a client has to go through to be able to fix this stuff, and then provide all the information that's pertinent to be able to do it. And that will stand people in a really good sort of process from my point of view anyway, when we're looking at candidates and everything else and how you sort of stand out from the rest of the field. I'm going to stop there because I realize I've gone 2 minutes over time. I'm very sorry, Debbie, but yeah, back to you. I'm happy to take comments and everything else, and I'll work through them towards the end of this webinar.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you very much to Ollie and Andy there. Much appreciated with all that information. And I think both of you needed to get quicker at the end because there is so much that you want to impart, and I know we do have a limited amount of time, but thank you very much. We've still got questions coming in, so please feel free, get those into that question pane, and we'll see if we can ask as many as we can at the end. So now I'm going to pass over to Stuart Morgan. Now, Stuart Morgan is a principal consultant at F-Secure. He's also a CREST assessor as well, and he will obviously be talking a little bit around the exams and all of that knowledge that he can impart to you now. So thank you very much, Stuart, and over to you.
Hey, thank you, Debbie. So hi, everyone. My name's Stuart. As Debbie said, she's already done the first bit of my speech, so it saves me the trouble. I've done a lot of things in my life, ranging from working in John Lewis to working for the ambulance service, for London Ambulance Service, and qualifying as a CAA pilot. But for the purposes of this, I'm a pen tester. I'm a red teamer, and I've been doing that for 17 years. Not red teaming for 17 years, it didn't really exist back in 2005. But these days, much like Matt, I rob banks for a living. You'll have probably seen some tools and various bits and pieces I've done in my time. There's extensions and plugins I've written for Metasploit and Ghostpack and similar. So apologies to all of you if you've had to debug any of my rather rubbish code written in a hurry. So I've been asked to try and impart something over 15 minutes or so and try and explain how you can get into this industry and what I look for, given that as part of my role, I also have the honor of hiring people. So really, this job, in terms of offensive security, it falls for me into 2 parts. there's the technical skills and your consultancy skills. So the technical skills include how to run tools and, more importantly, understanding how they work from first principles. This is a theme that the other speakers have commented on. In fact, almost all of them have mentioned in one form or another, and that's because it is that important. The consultancy skills are really all about how you deal with people. You'll be dealing with CEOs, you'll be dealing with people who are very stressed, who may or may not have the technical knowledge that you need. And as a consultant, your job is to understand the problem that you are trying to help them solve. So at work, my job is to help clients solve problems. And there's a whole bunch of techniques, from red teams, purple teams, pen tests, reverse engineering, and various other forms of research and consultancy, which are plugged together in order to help them solve a problem. No client ever wants a pen test for the sake of having one. They want one because they think it's a tool, it's a technique that they need to use in order to get them somewhere. And going back to what I said about understanding how tools work, if you want to break something, you need to be able to troubleshoot it. You need to understand how it works and then understand where the weaknesses are within it. And you can apply this to any aspect of security. I know I helped myself to a few questions in the chat, in the Q&A section. If you want to learn about vuln dev, so Windows exploitation, which does come in handy if you're writing custom implants that are used in red teams, you need to understand how code execution works. You need to understand how memory allocation works, how the heap works. If you want to understand how to find zero-day exploits, you need to understand, for example, how stack-based buffer overflow works and why it works, and the protections that are put in place to prevent it, such as DEP, and how ROP gadgets work in order to get around that. And if none of that made any sense and you want to learn, my strongest advice to you is just start. I know it sounds like a really easy thing to say, but that's because, in my experience, a lot of people are trained, usually through university, to plan their projects. So you never really start anything until you've already decided how you're going to finish it, which is a fantastic thing to do if you're building houses, but it's not great if you're trying to learn a skill like this. Because the thing that I look for, certainly in staff that come to work for me, is the ability to follow that process. So if you're interested in reverse engineering, just start. Find a project that you're interested in and just start looking into it, because you will learn that process of being able to troubleshoot, of figuring out how things work, trying them out. If you've ever, those of you who've learned to write code, I very much doubt you've been taught by going on one of those Python programming courses where you write hello world, and then the second thing you write for some reason or other is always a video database. You'll come up with something you want to do and just start and figure it out as you go along. The first ever time I wrote any code in Ruby was writing a Metasploit module. And I'd never coded in Ruby in my life before, but we needed a job doing. I needed to figure it out. And so with a lot of Stack Overflow and Google, that happened. And it will be clunky, it will be frustrating, but the skill you're learning in that troubleshooting is going to be far more pertinent than the specific piece of output at that time. When you're all playing on labs, so when you're using the various online labs I know all of you will be doing, I would strongly advise that you use this as an opportunity to work out how the tools work and what they're doing. The answer to how does Eternal Blue work is not Metasploit. Read up about it, read the source code, understand how that particular corruption vulnerability works. Not because you need to be able to reproduce it, but because you're learning the skills of being able to reverse engineer and understand the fundamentals of something. And when you're doing a pen test, assuming you're doing a proper penetration test, most of the job is actually understanding how the client network is built. Once you understand it, you will intuitively see the pathways through it. Now, I've also been asked to talk a little bit about the CREST exams, because as Debbie mentioned, I'm one of the assessors. I have contributed to or written many of the pen test exams that are currently offered. And there are two parts to this. There's the theory and the practical. Now, the theory is something that you will learn through exposure. There are some things that you are just expected to know, but a lot of them, things like port numbers, you're not being asked them because you need to be able to factually recall this in life. It's because if you do the job, there are certain port numbers that will just come naturally to you. You ought to know the port numbers for web, secure web, SSH, RDP, etc. Not because there's any great significance attached to them individually, but because if you do the job and if you're doing this all the time, you just come across this so often that they stick in your mind. The second part are practical exams, and these are typically lab-based. In fact, in CREST, they're all lab-based. And the biggest advice I have for you with these, and this is not specifically true of the CREST exams, it's true of doing this job, is you need to know how your tools work, you need to understand how to use them, and you need to be comfortable using them appropriately. A good analogy is recognizing, for those of you who drive, that having driven a car once with an instructor next to you is not the same as you being a competent driver. And in the same way, if you've been able to do something quite complicated, so an NTLM relay, if you've got that working once in a lab, that does not equate to you being able to do it comfortably. You need to practice it. You need to understand how it works. Try that same technique using different tools, maybe even write an implementation of it yourself, not because that will get you anything you didn't have before in terms of a practical tool, but if you manually implement a tool that already exists, you have immediately learned how it works. Most of the work I do on red teams is troubleshooting things that should work but don't. There's been a few questions about certificates and jobs, and I think this is quite a contentious point. For me, the certificate is something that you get to prove that you can do something. It doesn't prove that you have the potential in the future to do something. Certainly in my employer, certificates are needed at the higher levels because if you're expecting to come into our work as a consultant, we need to know that you actually have the experience and the capability, and a certificate such as CRT is one of the ways of doing that. But you don't actually need certifications to get a job. The certificates say that you have a specific form of knowledge, and assuming that the certification authority, the organization you do it with, is credible, it will mean that you can do the job already. If you're at university and you're looking to join a consultancy firm, I would be very surprised if you had a certificate that is only normally passed by people who've been doing the job a year. And that's no failing on your part. It's simply that learn to do the job and then you'll pass the exam later. One of the questions that came up was around imposter syndrome, and do we get it? The answer is all the time. Because you see the gap between where you are and where you could be. And you also see that as you specialize more and more, all of the other skills slip by the wayside. My career is a mixture of management and red teaming, which means that any bits and pieces I've done for incident response have unfortunately had to slip. And I would love to learn more about that. I'd love to be able to do what Matt does. And understand more about TI like Ollie and Andy, but that's just, it's not possible to do that. So you will forever feel that you're playing catch up. But I think the other question was around how do you protect yourself against it? And I would say that you don't really need to. You need to recognize that you're never going to be an expert in everything, and that that's okay, because the industry is so complex, it's so diverse, and it's so specialist that you simply can't be. This is not just true of cybersecurity, by the way. As I said, I also work for the ambulance service. And when you go into hospital, if you take a patient with a heart attack into a heart attack centre, they use skills and techniques I'll never know. And then when you go to a child who's fitting and you then take them to a paediatric centre, they have skills and drugs that we're not even allowed anywhere near. So every industry you go in, as you become more and more advanced, you will realise that it's actually okay to not be perfect at everything. But the journey you're going through, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but the journey that you're going through is actually the thing that will stick in your mind. There were some questions around common interview questions, and I don't want to steal the thunder of anyone else, and I know we'll come back to this question later, but for me, there are three things that I usually get you to do. The first thing I will ask you to do at interviews is I'll find something that you know, and I'll push your knowledge a little bit, because what I want to do is to see how quickly you make connections and deductions and how quickly you learn. Being able to factually recall stuff is sort of nice, and you'll pass most theory exams with it, but it doesn't actually mean you're capable. And the flip side of that is that you don't need to sit there learning a textbook for the sake of it. One of the guys who came to work for us spent his evenings learning ETC/services for reasons beyond me, because he felt that his knowledge wouldn't be complete unless he knew every single service for almost every of the 65,000 plus ports. The second thing that we'll do is I'll ask you to explain something very technical, very simply, because your job, or part of your job, will be to be able to take a very technical concept and teach someone, turn it into something that a businessman or businesswoman, business person would understand. You're going to have to take technical vulnerabilities and explain them to someone who is in charge of risk, who has very little technical knowledge. The third thing that I'll ask you to do is to teach me something. So take a skill, take a piece of technical knowledge that you have and teach it to me. Because if you understand something well enough to be able to teach it, you've really, really understood it. Someone else asked if you have to do both offensive and defensive security. I've only ever done offensive security. I've never worked in a SOC. As you get more defensive, or as you get more specialist knowledge, you will find there is a level of overlap. I have an understanding of how defensive teams work. I have an understanding of how EDR solutions work. But that understanding has come from offensive security and the role within it. There are lots of things that you will learn in this career path. You'll learn to be a reverse engineer. You'll learn to be a troubleshooter. You'll learn to be a sysadmin, because these are, in order to be able to break something, you have to understand it first. And if you want to be able to get round a monitoring solution, it's really handy if you understand what that monitoring solution does. So you'll need an awareness of these, but you can do both if you want to. There's nothing at all wrong with that, but you don't have to. And the last question that I've helped myself to from the Q&A section is the best CREST certs to start with. If you're joining the industry, start with CPSA, the CREST Practitioner Security Analyst, which is a multiple choice exam at Pearson VUE, which is a theory exam. Once you've done that, if you're specifically looking at CREST exams, move on to the CRT, the CREST Registered Tester exam, which is a practical lab-based exam for 2.5 hours. With that, I'll be around to pick up any questions for me, and back to you, Debbie.
That's great. Thank you so much for imparting there and for answering a few of those questions there that are coming in, because we have got quite a few to get through. We will offer those out to the rest of the panel if they've got any comments on those. So I am not going to keep talking. I am now going to pass across to Sava Pistolis from Cyber Pathway Supervisor at the National Cyber Resilience Centre Group. And Sava is going to go through a little bit about the careers path and the cyber pathways, and talk to you a little bit more about, you know, when you're actually coming into this industry, what you're thinking about and what you're looking for. So thank you very much, and over to you, Sava.
Thank you, Debbie. It's a pleasure to be here, and I just want to say thanks to everyone who's spoken already. It's been really, really interesting. So I work at the National Cyber Resilience Centre Group, and my job title is the Cyber Path Supervisor, so it's quite a mouthful. And to give that some immediate context, it's a partnership, it's police-led, it's Home Office backed, it's NCSE backed, and it's a partnership between police, private sector and academia. It's 9 regional centres comprising all of England, and I am a member of the national team, and we collaborate with them to deliver a service catalogue of 8 security services. And that's security services that are intended for use in the SME community. So small and medium enterprises, organisations that haven't begun to consider their cybersecurity posture are off put by the cost or the time or the other kind of things that might come up when you're looking to start thinking about that and you're a completely unrelated SME. And we do that through the cyber path, which is a arguably crammed in, it's short for police and academia talent horizons. And it's essentially a talent pipeline that's managed by the National CRC Group. And we take an intake of students from university yearly, ideally quite performant students from cybersecurity courses up and down England. We partner with 32 universities. And my job is to pair those students with real industry projects that we are giving to SMEs in England in a way that delivers a industry level, bulletproof service, and also suitably develops the students who are taking that service into their stride and delivering that project. In terms of context for me, I also have consulted privately on occasion, and was doing a consulting gig when I moved into this job, when I was consulting from straight out of uni. Now, national definitely takes a front seat now. That is my full-time position, and a position that I kind of give all of my time to, really. But I mention it because it will give some context to, I think, my attitudes towards working and approach to your kind of professional development. And to give some kind of context to how I got here, my pathway into cybersecurity was completely recreational. I always had a kind of passing interest in tech and what I would now call offensive security, and got into trouble for that when I was a bit younger, at school and stuff. Nothing crazy, nothing major, but I never formally paired it with my education. It was never anything to do with cyber. I originally wanted to go to university to do politics, which I'm really, really happy I didn't in the end. But I underperformed in my A-levels, which were in law, economics, and politics. So completely unrelated, but kind of to do with developing this like worldly knowledge. So my hobby interest in cyber and offensive security continued to develop whilst I was working full-time at Tesco in the year after my A-levels. And I decided, like, I was very close to not going to university because I didn't perceive it as a useful career path. I didn't think of it as a place where you could go to learn practical skills. So I decided I wasn't going to go. But then I found a course that did change my mind, and that was the Applied Cybersecurity Bachelor's at the University of South Wales. I visited the campus and I spoke to the lecturers, and I really liked how hands-on it was. We had a whole syllabus that was basically based off of real engagement with local Welsh businesses. Anyway, the degree went really well for me, and I really, really enjoyed it. I moved to Newport for a few years, which was where the degree was based. And the highlights of that degree, I got a good grade and I really enjoyed it, and it was a good solid degree. But the highlights were obviously what I did on top of that. And what I did on top of that, well, I got to the national finals of an ethical hacking competition, which was really fun. World Skills UK, if you've heard of it, give it a Google. If you're still at university, it's definitely something to get some attention with. But a really important one was that I managed to get a spot in the Cyber Resilience Centre for Wales, which was obviously the Welsh Regional Cyber Resilience Centre. So I joined them as a CyberPath student, and really, really soon, I was quite frequently delivering security awareness training to small businesses. I was writing content for their blogs. I was doing technical services for them, and they provided me like quite an abundance of development opportunities. I graduated from university, and I was faced with this kind of daunting job market, as some people have kind of spoken about already. The kind of opportunities for entry-level roles that really do kind of provide an authentic pathway for development are still quite hard to find. And I was quite lucky, and I'll say very lucky, in that I started messaging random companies on LinkedIn who were big enough and financially inclined enough to have kind of some digital presence and have some staying power financially, but had no mention of a security team or a third-party MSP or anything like that on their LinkedIn. So I reached out and I offered incredibly reduced rates for what I was doing, which ended up for a few companies during the summer after graduation being policy writing, security awareness training, the kind of stuff I was taught how to do at the Cyber Resilience Centre for Wales, which again was mediated by the company I now work for, the National Cyber Resilience Centre Group. It's always a mouthful to say. But I was looking at jobs all over the show, and I wasn't, and I'm still not entirely dead set on where I want to go, which I think is a good thing and something that I'm not worried about. I used to be very worried about, but you don't need to be worried about not knowing what you want to do precisely. And the opportunity came along to apply for this position, which was to administer the talent pipeline that I was once a member of and was now finding successful consulting work by virtue of the stuff I was taught there. And I thought, the work that the centre was doing was relevant to the topic I ended up doing my dissertation on as well, which was assessing kind of the British business landscape for a few different tools that were police developed or police backed and aimed at SMEs. And I had a real interest in the idea of developing security and the posture for SMEs who don't really want to think about it too much, and kind of convincing them that they should be. And so I decided that I kind of had to take the job because it was an answer to the question I posed in my dissertation, and I felt like I essentially wanted to help develop the opportunities for other students, that which they developed for me. And so there's so much I could try and cram into talking about today, but obviously I'll explicitly mention what we're looking for at the National Cyber Resilience Centre Group, at the regional centres, and at CyberPath, because it's a fantastic talent pipeline to be on. But I'll also hopefully share a few opinions on what I think everyone should be doing to prepare for and develop their career in cybersecurity, and hopefully as well just kind of personal development, which I think is a really, really important part of building a balanced career trajectory and or a balanced relationship to your work. And I can also, pledge that I'm available on LinkedIn and Twitter if anyone wants to kind of chat anything more specific over, and obviously I'll be here for the Q&A as well. But I'll jump into and explain why I think I kind of am entitled to have insights on the things I'm going to say. But we are technically an SME ourselves. The national team is only 7 people strong. And so I have to wear a lot of hats at this job. It's a little bit of a project manager role, a little bit of a supervisory role over students, and a little bit of project delivery across our 8 services as well. So functionally, that starts when I host technical scoping calls with businesses that range from one-man bands out the back of a white van to medium-large charities that take over whole regions, or industry giants on occasion that really have the security posture that's equivalent to an SME. Anyway, all of them are looking to create or develop their security posture. And I hold chats and technical conversations and ascertain their needs, and then cost that for a specific project. Then I'll draw on our fantastic student cadre, and I'll find a student who can deliver that project with my support. And of course, the support of the other supervisors on Path. So it's my pretty clear responsibility to develop the student as I'm delivering the project. And so striking that balance, there's a lot of time for reflection and development of all of those processes. And those services, there are 8 of them, but broadly, they are policy services, they are vulnerability assessments. We do internet discovery and kind of open source intelligence investigations. And then a huge one is security awareness training. And Stuart kind of touched on how important it was earlier to develop your communication skills in translating technical information into the language of the department you're talking to, or into the language of risk, or into the language of finance, or into the language of marketing, if need be, right? So SATs are a fantastic opportunity for our students. They're really popular in industry because they're a really good way to improve the resilience of your staff. And we find that it's obviously really transformative for the student personal confidence and professional confidence as well. So, I get to see a lot of different aspects of a very broad landscape and work with a lot of different companies that have incredibly different setups and different organizational structures. And, I can hopefully combine this with the perceptions of my peers who went to university with me, and assess what's going well for them and what isn't, and try and hopefully earnestly give some authentic kind of guidance. I think the prerequisite really is to always make sure you're doing that extracurricular stuff. And this is the one that I think everyone will say first. Always make sure you've got an active interest outside of the educational pipeline you're on, or whatever whatever journey you're taking to develop your skills, it shouldn't always be done and structured for you. The most that can ever hope to be is signposting what you should be doing in your own time. And university tends to try and formalize every discipline possible in a way that can be ingested piece by piece. But it is, as one of the Matts said, something that you really do want to care about if you're going to do it, because there's a lot of headaches that can crop up, especially in the crunchier roles. So speaks more as well to the idea of kind of developing these certifications. They should be seen as byproducts and symptoms of the experience you're having, instead of signifiers of talent that's yet to come, which is, I know, just rehashing what Stuart said, but it was important enough that I wrote it down, because there isn't really a lot you can do to convince somebody that you've had experience that you haven't had, problems solved that have been essentially randomly generated by the universe and thrown at you. But in terms of really actionable things that I think are outstandingly useful for building a presence and building a memorability, and building good networks and keeping good networks as you're developing your circles in the sphere of cybersecurity, is to document the progress that you're going through. I don't know who's attending today, for example, and I don't know exactly what you have done and haven't done and where you put your energy. And if any of you follow me on Twitter, am I going to reliably be able to click on your profile and assess your personal brand for a consistent pointing towards what you've done? Progress that isn't like properly documented for the purposes of recruiters and people who are looking to ascertain your talent hasn't happened. It hasn't happened yet. Am I able to dig through the work you've done and the blogs you've written and the write-ups you've made, and ascertain exactly where you've put your energy and effort and what you're good at that possibly isn't written on a university transcript? And this is a good thing for so many different reasons, to start trying to document your progress. And I mean to do this, on social media, so LinkedIn and Twitter, but also like start a website. It's free to start a website other than the cost of the domain name, and keep a blog, keep a write-up of the things that you're doing, and convert university exercises and assessments into blog posts and write-ups, and share what you're doing. It really helps build, I think, a staying power, especially when, again, so many people use university now as a pipeline to kind of get into cyber, that unfortunately you do need to differentiate against maybe 50 people who have done the same exact course as you. I'd also say take an ungodly amount of notes if possible. If you're not taking notes from tonight, I don't mean about me, but just in general, there have been a lot of people who are very, very deeply embedded in industry here and have done so off of evidently quite a lot of hard work. Learn from them, write things down from them, and then accept that we can forget things. So write stuff down and categorize it properly and keep notes. And obviously, if you're at university, if you're doing stuff like, I don't know, try hack me and stuff like that, keep notes, keep things that you can reference, have a massive document, store it in the cloud somewhere where you can access it from any device, and have that to hand. And it also helps, if you take the time to develop a consistent kind of personal brand, and I don't like to use marketing terms, but if you do take the time to develop a personal brand, it will give you that memorability for recruiters who might not be technical, who might not know exactly what they're looking for or which people to collect or scrape off of LinkedIn. So if you can do as much work as possible, little and often over time, to signal the work that you've done, it makes conversations a lot easier down the road. I'll also say, Matt earlier said that you need to make your own luck. I agree with him. I say, maybe a little bit more robotically, increase the surface area of your luck and opportunity. And that can be done in obviously so many different types of ways, but the ideal thing to do that I would suggest is, there's two things really. First, develop a pitch that you can, in 40 seconds in conversation, casual conversation, talk about where you've been, where you are, and where you're going, and what you want and how you want to develop, and what you can kind of offer up, if that makes any sense. And what that means is when Matt Lawrence sat down with the guy who ended up getting him a gig as a security analyst, you are organically prepared to talk about yourself. I don't think many people are very used to talking about themselves. It's something you only get good at after you've interviewed a lot. It's only something you get good at after you've been asked to do it a lot. And the first few times are very uncomfortable. So if you can kind of get those social barriers and professional etiquette barriers out of the way earlier, it means that you will keep your surface area huge for opportunities, for random people you bump into, for connections you meet, for talks you go to, all of that. Secondly, I would suggest, and this one gets mixed reviews for sure, but I would suggest to interview. The biggest bump is when you get your first salaried job, because that can be a huge hunt. But once you're in and you're consistently earning and you're relaxed and there's a workflow and you're doing your best, obviously, to prove that you are, you know, enjoying this and good at this and developing, don't stop interviewing for jobs. I'm not saying do the thing where you salary hop for an extra 800 quid a year or whatever, because I don't think that's a good way to treat people who give you opportunities. And I don't think it's a particularly good way to direct a career. You should stay somewhere where the work-life balance is good, the opportunities are good, and the team have things to teach you. But continue to interview. If you're interviewing for a job that you know you won't take, you can treat it as a workshop on your interview practice, on your professional development, and learn to just obliterate those nerves. And there's also a huge obvious benefit to knowing your exact salaried worth at 5 companies who have all offered you a job over half a year, or, you know, keeping that momentum means you won't feel like your only opportunity is the opportunity you're currently engaged with, and it will invite you to reflect on what's missing in your current opportunities, or what you've already got in your other opportunities that other jobs can't afford you right now. So I think it helps you kind of develop a sense of worth. And speaking of worth, and kind of the main or the final point I really want to talk about is learning how to strike a good work-life balance. We've already had people talking about how it's the work you don't see, the under labor, right? The labor that goes into the labor, that showcases your commitment to development, that showcases your ability to perform well in corporate and security environments. I would say that social professional skills are really important, and you can develop those by developing a holistic relationship to the world around you, which is having parts of your life that aren't your work. You will get on with your work a lot easier if it doesn't tie into how you perceive yourself, or if it doesn't tie into your worth of yourself. And in fact, it might facilitate being able to jump wholeheartedly into doing the best job you possibly can, because you can get rid of a lot of the anxieties or the kind of imposter syndrome by not tying your worth to your performance at work that week, or what somebody in the office has done better than you, or even getting a cool little fun boost from doing something better than somebody else. If you have a consistent sense of self-worth that you draw from a place that isn't the work you're doing, you can really commit yourself to the work you're doing in a healthy, sustainable way that will avoid burnout and make for really meaningful engagements. You'll be able to say, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I need some help from a technical senior, or, oh, I absolutely know what I'm doing. Maybe I should actually give this to somebody who could develop on it, and I could ask for something different. And striking that balance as well means having hobbies that aren't pen testing, hobbies that aren't crunchy stuff, hobbies that are not even hobbies, right? Just spending time in the world and away from very hyper specific things. And that's not to say that you shouldn't go down those rabbit holes and get really interested in it. It's just to say that if you do spend that extra time in kind of building a worldly knowledge and a healthy relationship with the whole world, that I think it serves to benefit obviously wellness and you know, your well-being and all of that, but it also makes you an easy hire, in my opinion. Like if you have an interesting conversation with your recruiter, something that makes you memorable, or something that makes you come across as obviously undeniably human and social and easy to work with, especially if the person hiring you is someone who's going to work with you or direct you to work with people that they work under or work above or whatever, then coming across as easygoing, balanced, engaged, and ready to develop and happy is obviously going to do you wonders. I don't want to be reductive, but it's a binary. You're either technically qualified for a position or you're not. And if you're not, then there's a margin within that of how not ready you should be in order to have it as a development opportunity, and how really not ready you should be to maybe come back when it's ready to be a development opportunity. And being pro-social and relaxed and having a value that is not at all impacted by the interview you're about to have will do you wonders, and it will make you feel like a heavy hitter. It will make you feel like you can just walk into the interview. It's a perfect development opportunity if it's there, but if I don't make it, it's not a reflection on me. It's a reflection on so many other variables. So I know I'm all over the place there, but I just think when I sat down, I wanted to write about what I wish someone had kind of sat down, held me by the shoulders, and said to me when I was looking to, like, how do I turn this degree into a job? But I'll round out, and I'll obviously I think the Q&A is after this, which is exciting. But what does Cyberpath want? If you're interested in coming and joining our fantastic talent pipeline, successful applicants essentially get to do vulnerability assessments on huge organizations. They get to do internet investigations on C-level employees who are looking to assess for potential reputational harm or security concerns that can be discovered from their name. You get to do security awareness training and deliver to warehouses full of 50 people. It's a really, really good gig, and it's a really fun gig. And probably, sorry, should have mentioned, it is paid as well. It's paid, and it's paid quite well. And if the best thing to do is to visit our website, you need to have 11 months of education remaining. It needs to be full-time education. And beyond that, it needs to really be that it's a cybersecurity or a justifiably cybersecurity related degree. You need to have a desire to work on obviously real industry projects with supervision. You need to have an existing set of skills in a given area relevant to our service catalogue. But similarly, you do need to have a lack of skills in a given area relevant to our service catalogue. We're not looking for, industry ninjas with 50+ years of experience. We are looking for people who aren't good at things yet, who are looking to develop on those things. And that's one of the joys of this being a not-for-profit that's backed by the Home Office. It's essentially about improving the resilience of the UK SME business landscape, which means that we are running at a loss on the services we're delivering to SMEs by and large, but it also means we get to invest in the students who are coming through to develop them to be actors in the British business landscape in terms of cybersecurity. So you can get me on Twitter at this name, Savapostolous, this name, my name. Or you can just Google National Cyber Resilience Centre Group, and you should be able to make your way from there. And we will be recruiting in January, I believe. So with that, I'll thank you for listening, and hand back over to Debbie. I think Debbie or Adriana.
You certainly are. Thank you
Debbie,
very much.
you.
And what a great amount of information that you've just imparted to everybody there. We've had a few questions come in, and when we do come into the question and answer session here, I may ask those ones just a little bit, because it went off the back of what you were saying, really, just before we move on to the others. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's been listening, and thank you so much to our panelists who have been giving so much information on here. It's been brilliant. Thank you. So we will move on to the question and answer session now. And there are some specific questions to some of our panelists, and there's some all-round questions really that we will be looking at. But Sava, if I could just go off of what you were saying there, and how people can get involved. We'd had a couple of questions come in, and they said, should they be getting involved while they're at university, and if do they have to be partnered in it with a university that may be partnered with your scheme, or is it that they can do it as a specific individual?
So at the moment we partner with 32 universities. The best thing to do, because we are looking to grow that number, is ask a senior member of your faculty if you are in partnership with the National CRC group and network. Because if you are, fantastic, we'll get in touch. And if you're not, then you can try and put a little bit of pressure on your university to engage in the free process of starting a relationship with us. And it's a network we started with the National Cybersecurity Centre's accredited university degrees, but it's grown beyond that, and it is growing. So I wouldn't send an email out of the blue. I would keep it in the forefront of your mind by maybe following it on LinkedIn or Twitter. If you haven't got LinkedIn, get LinkedIn, I would say, is the first step. And then try and do it internally through your university to demonstrate some demand to your university for that kind of relationship. And that's a process that's relatively easy on our side. So I'd just say, yeah, do it that way.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I just thought I'd ask those ones, seeing that what you were just talking about. So moving on to some of the other questions. So with regards to CVs, and this is a question to all our panelists, so whoever would like to start asking. I know that a couple of you have obviously covered this, but how can someone really make their CV stand out amongst everyone else who has similar qualifications? So is there some things that they should be putting on their CVs that you would really like to see? So I can see Stuart's got his hand up, so I'm going to pass over to him first.
Okay, thank you. It's a very good question. There was a whole webinar about this. For me, your CV needs, this is going to sound a little bit patronizing, but it needs to be honest. I read through at least 30 a day CVs, and they all have a paragraph at the top that tells me that the person is looking to forge a career in cybersecurity, very punctual, very reliable, works well on their own and as part of a team, very keen to learn and very self-sufficient. Then there's a massive description about what you've done at uni, so details about the cybersecurity module. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not being dismissive over that, but that's what everyone sends. So if you think back to the speech I did, and it was actually massively overlapping with a lot of the other speakers, we want people who can troubleshoot, who can figure things out. So if you've written any tools that you've contributed in GitHub and the industry, it doesn't matter if those tools existed somewhere else. It's the fact that you've learned that skill, you've taken a problem and you've solved it. If you've been involved in any conferences, either delivering talks or undertaking training or something like that, if you've been able to do relevant training, so generally speaking, CREST certs are good, cyber scheme certs are good, offensive security certs are good. If you've done courses or exams in those areas, that's worth knowing. But the short version of this is, be very critical over your CV. If it doesn't add, it detracts. So if there's something on there that is not relevant directly to you being a pen tester or an incident responder or a reverse engineer or a threat intelligence provider or researcher, if it's not relevant, get rid of it. We don't need to know that you got a swimming certificate aged 5. We don't need to know that you were the president of the tuck shop in school, unless it's directly relevant to the job you're going for. And no more than 2 sides of A4, please.
Great, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to
sorry, just to add to that, and don't cheat the 2 sides of A4 by making it size 8 text. We will be able to.
Fair. Fair
It's
point.
very, very true. Yes. So follow that piece of advice, please, everyone. I'm going to hand over to.
Can I just add on to the end of that as well? I think sometimes, I mean, I've certainly done this with my own CV. You want to demonstrate so much about like experience that think of different ways that you can actually present some of that experience so that you're not kind of writing tomes of information. Like, I think that they should look good to start with. You know, I've never been a fan of it just being boring, because I know that somebody at the other end is going to have to sit through that, and it doesn't. I'm really into graphics, so that's very much a reflection of me to try and you know, make my CV engaging. And so, for an example, for my job for Cyberus, I was trying to convey to my boss at the time my experience in various aspects of programming and stuff. And rather than saying, well, I'm really good at this, but I'm not so good at that, I just did some like dials which represented where I was in terms of, well, this I'm, you know, full tilt, but this I'm sort of halfway, and this I'm working on it. And he liked that so much that I think he even stole some of those ideas for his own. So think about how you're presenting yourself to people, and how you want to be kind of remembered to sort of stand out.
That's great. Thank you very much, Matt. And if I hand over to Matt Lawrence now, get the Matts right, and I'm on a roll.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, I echo what both Stu and Matt have just said there, for sure. Just kind of very specific tip is that every sentence on your CV really matters. And one really good question to ask yourself at the end of every sentence that you're writing in your CV is, so what? I see a lot of CVs where there's a lot of really interesting and intriguing statements, but they kind of finish abruptly. It's okay to say that you have a particular experience, but how is that relevant to you? What does that give you? A very sort of generic example here is that commonly on CVs you'll see things like I'm conversant in Microsoft Office software. That's a statement in its own right. It's not very interesting. If you ask yourself, so what, and extend that to talk about what does that actually give you. Obviously, when we're getting into technical roles, you need to be beyond Microsoft Office software. I'm giving a generic example, but really just kind of take the time to sort of really think about what you're writing and make sure it's relevant to you know, particularly to the role that you're applying for.
Great, thank you. And Stuart, I can see you got your hand up again. So do you want to come in?
Cheers. I had one more thing to suggest, and it's I think it's something that is often overlooked with CVs. When I have nothing against careers advisors, by the way, but when you look at the careers advisor information, and certainly the information I got at uni about building a career, building a CV, a lot of them had very, very strange advice. So it was things like, make sure you're very clear on transferable skills, say everything. And that might be fine, but in this industry, the people reading your CVs are doing your job, and they know how to do your job, and they will make leaps. So for example, a lot of people list what they can do. So I'll see screenfuls of, I can code in Python and Ruby and Miranda, which is a functional programming language from 2000, and things like that. And kind of bluntly, you're not. No one is going to be proficient in 15 different programming languages. You'll probably be proficient in 2. And so don't lie about it, but also you can demonstrate capability that we will pick up on. So for example, if you've released tools, if you've released Metasploit modules and you've released tools that you've written in Python, if I'm looking at your CV, and if any of my colleagues are looking at your CV, and you put a link to the, you know, your GitHub page and a description of the Metasploit modules, we know that you can code in Ruby and Python, because there is no way you could have released those tools without doing it. And that is incredibly powerful. So I'm not saying you immediately have to start releasing tools, but if you demonstrate, we will make inferences. If you demonstrate knowledge and capability through what you've done, you don't need to take up tons of paper explaining it bit by bit, because we know. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. And is there anybody else? Oh, I've got Sava. Yeah, hands up.
Nothing so kind of architectural. That's all really good advice. I'll probably use some of that myself. But just the really basic stuff as well, like please put your name in the file, please save it as a PDF. Just because I know, at least within my industry, they are opened, not industry, sorry, at my org, they are opened at weekends on phones, and docx's are clunky and annoying. And just, I think, to make it as seamless as an experience as possible, don't let the immediate association with your name be a frustrated moment.
That's great. Thank you very much. So just keeping with the CVs, I've got a couple of extra questions around that have just come in. So somebody has actually said on there, to save some space, would it be a good idea to link it to Credly to show your certificates achievements? What's your thoughts on that? Go on, Stuart.
It's not a bad idea. It's not something that I've seen many people do, although I've seen a few people who've put up links either to Credly or any other similar digital verifiers. Typically, when I was talking about the sides of A4, it wasn't so much about saving space for the sake of it. It was that forces you to be very efficient. Now, if you've got industry certifications like CREST, OSCP, or offensive security qualifications or similar, then you can put them directly into your CV. If we need to verify them, we will have a way of doing that. Nothing wrong with Credly if you want to present your CV like that. It's certainly not a terrible idea, just not one that I've seen most people do, but don't let that stop you. It's all good.
Great, thank you. Is there any other people that have any comments on that? Oh, can anybody hear me? Excellent, good, fantastic. So the other thing was with regards to personal interests. So actually putting some information on there of things that you do in your own personal time. Is there any comments around that and what you should see on the CV?
So I'll just pick that one up quickly. I did drop a comment in response to that in the background while we were talking on another subject. Again, speaking personally, I quite like to see a CV that has at least some element of the personality of the person that I'm interviewing portrayed in it. It's especially valuable if you can link it in some way to the role that you're applying for. I think back to people we've recruited over the last couple of years in my team, and I can think of at least one person who may have come from a background that wasn't a traditional threat intelligence background. They may not have had any direct experience from their kind of career, from their academia, or for any of the roles they'd worked in inverted commas threat intelligence, but they had some non-professional kind of personal experience in a couple of areas that were very, very much of interest to us. When we drilled a little bit further into this with this person in some of the interview sessions, it provoked some of the most interesting discussion areas. I mean, it's one of these classic perspective issues where they'd come from quite a different, as kind of a third country kid, they'd come from quite a different background. They had a really real kind of interest and nous in trying to understand kind of with the hat of kind of people from different cultural or national backgrounds, kind of different factors that might motivate people to behave or kind of act in certain ways. And that's a skill that's really useful and transferable within the threat intelligence space, because a lot of what you're doing is trying to understand how somebody else is thinking and acting, what motivates them, what drives them, what other factors, tangible and non-tangible, might be behind their actions. So that person now works for us. They're in a role within my organization, not because of anything they'd done from a professional perspective, but because they were able to link something they had a personal interest in to the work that they'd be doing for us.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ollie. And if I can pass over to you, Matt, now, please.
Yeah, just to carry on with what Oliver said, as you can see, I'm quite into music, and so I can use that as an example. I've played in bands, and so I've worked through many artistic differences with the people that I've played in those bands with, and so demonstrating that you can be a team player and linking it back to the things that you do outside of crunching away on a keyboard is always good to sort of humanize. We're not robots at the end of the day, so giving a piece of something which is important to you but maybe not directly relevant to the job, that I feel there's generally be a route back to that as a reflection of who you are as a person.
That's great. And over to you, Stuart.
Cheers, thank you. So yeah, agree with everyone else. For me though, the thing about personal interests is I remember that when I was taught how to write a CV, everyone said always put some personal interest in it. Shows you have a personality. And then I now look at CVs, and the last one I looked at literally had watching TV brackets, films and horrors, and drinking as the two interests that were on this CV. So bluntly, there is a stereotype that some IT people lack social skills. And the thing is that if you've done things with other people, you've gone and done activity, so that could be music in a band, paddle boarding, sailing, flying, just any sort of interest, it actually does also show that you have a level of well-roundedness. And whatever the political correctness people say, it is incredibly important. We are dealing with clients, we are dealing with other individuals. It's important to be able to relate to them on a human level as well as on a technical one. So you don't have to put personal interests in, don't overthink it. But if you do put personal interests in, don't put things like I like sleeping, because what it does, it doesn't convey the message that you want it to convey. If all of you on this call will do something, you might not think of it as interesting, but it will be something that is unique about you. It could be that you really like animals and go horse riding or basket weaving or something, but it's something that shows that you have an interest and a personality outside this industry, and you will draw on that in order to be able to relate to other people.
Great, thank you very much. And has anybody else got any other comments? Okay.
Just a very quick one. Cybersecurity roles, often you're going to spend a lot of time writing reports, so have a good CV. It's probably going to demonstrate that you're going to be good at doing that. Very true, very true. And I was a bit worried there because I thought Stu might have been reading my CV when he said about horror stories and drinking. So I'll have to tailor mine, I think. And so okay, so moving on. I know we talked a little bit whilst we were going through the sessions, and we were talking about stress and burnout, and there's been quite a few questions that have come in that have been talking about that. And I think preparing yourself, I think from going to university or wherever whatever you're doing now, or college, and then coming into an industry, and it can be a little bit worrying when they hear that you may be working 12 hours or you're working nights and things like that. So have you got any sort of things that you can impart to people to say when they're kind of preparing, and what they would be looking at? I know one of the examples was given about coming into a SOC and perhaps working sort of 4-day shifts and things like that of 12 hours and going into that, which can be a very different thing to when you've been studying. So I can see a couple of hands up already. So can I pass that over to Ollie first to start us off? Yep, happy to kick that one off. So I was actually typing a response to that one in the background, but I thought I might as well just hop in and comment on it. I think it's the first thing there with that specific question around the 12-hour days. It's worth drawing a little bit of a distinction between an incident response role and a SOC analyst role. They are very similar in terms of some of those kind of key skill sets and things like that, but they are not necessarily the same. From my experience in the IR space before I moved into CTI, we would generally speaking, we would work a traditional 9 to 5:30. Incident response is not all about responding to incidents in a lot of organizations. There's a lot of proactive work that happens in that incident response space as well. So doing proactive security, threat hunting, and some of those other activities. It's not always firefighting. However, particularly with incident response, there is usually an expectation that, particularly if you're progressing further into your career and you're in more of an incident management focused role, that
because you are essentially an emergency service, you are firefighting, there will often be situations where you may get pulled into supporting things that are significantly longer term. At the end of the day, if you're responding to a crisis, you aren't in control of the timelines that are being worked there. It's one of the sorts of things that organizations kind of have to accept. And I still dabble my toe in the incident response space. So within the company I work for, I'm actually one of our on-call responders. I'm not on call this week, but I am one of the folk who may get a telephone call from some of our customers to come in and provide triage support out of hours for them. It's fairly common for people in the incident response space in particular to be on call, but we don't tend to have the same 24/7, 365 models that you see within security operations centers, where there might be a slight differentiation between that. And I think it's worth drawing, kind of highlighting that there's a bit of difference there.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ollie. Can I pass over to Boglarka now? That'd be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I just wanted to make a quick comment on kind of from a pen test / ethical hacking point of view that kind of crunch and burnout is a real thing. It is affecting the industry. If you go to, or if you have been to conferences recently, you will find talks or discussions at almost all of them. And I kind of do think that you've got to be prepared to spend some of your own time when you get on the journey. Especially in that kind of first year or so of your career, because there is going to be some of the areas that you need to learn are going to take time, and they're going to take that. As kind of Stuart said, it won't be something that you'll be able to get on the first try. Sometimes it involves troubleshooting and spending time on it. So it's kind of it's important that you push yourself. And recognize that you will need to spend some of your own time on engaging with these things, but it's also important that you do this so long as you enjoy doing it, and don't feel or don't be afraid to question yourself if you think that something is not quite right. Take a bit of time every week, you know, on a Saturday or whenever your downtime is, to reflect on what happened that week. Maybe keep a diary, kind of and keep a score of how you've been feeling, and then look back over the past few weeks and check if you're on a downward tendency, or if you're doing fine, or if you're stable. And if you are feeling overwhelmed, you need to think about it. You need to think about what is making you feel that way. It's important to find a working environment and a studying environment and a peer network that is supportive to you. Look for companies that allow you to kind of shadow projects, to build up your skills, where you have functions like a line manager or a buddy system that can actually afford to spend time with you and to help you with getting there, or help you get through some of these challenges. Look for a good atmosphere. Obviously, some of these are cliches, but you can ask these questions during your interviews, and you can get a kind of some level of understanding of the community that exists within that business or within that space that you're looking to join. And kind of like I said, just don't be afraid to think about, reflect on yourself. And if you are really not feeling that this thing is for you, maybe it is something that you need to change, and then don't be afraid to make that change, and then find somewhere else that you think it might be better for you.
That's great. Thank you very much there, Boglarka. And Matt, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, just want to echo both what sort of Oliver and Boglarka were saying there, really. Just from an incident response perspective, you know, Ollie's right. Generally, it's sort of, you know, there is requirement to be on call, but usually that's spread throughout a team. So, you know, you do get sort of downtime outside of your on call times. At other times, obviously, like sometimes major incidents come in and it's all hands on deck. But even in a busy team, real sort of punchy major incidents come in once in a while, and normally they're the most interesting incidents to be involved in, and ostensibly the most fun, can be tiring, but often depends on your perspective. I personally have found throughout my career a big incident is a great way to learn something quickly and at pace, and it's rare to be in a position where you can kind of pick up so much knowledge so in such a short span of time, particularly if you're a natural procrastinator. A major incident is an excellent way of getting yourself aligned and getting things moving. Also, just to Boglarka's point, which I do completely agree with, I think we need to sort of separate the relationship between hours worked and burnout. You can burn out, but only work a few hours a week. Burnout is often sort of, at least in my experience, and I've supported a lot of people who have kind of faced this, tends to be often aligned to the individual's tendency to hold on to stress and tension, and often is a direct result of their inability to reach out and speak up about some of the sort of stress and pressures that they're facing. I suppose sometimes this can be linked to things like imposter syndrome and things like that. So you know, some of us are lucky to have people that we can open up and talk to on a regular basis. Sometimes you're lucky enough to have managers and things that are understanding, but that's not necessarily always the case. I think it's really important to take a personal responsibility in sort of the management of your sort of potential for burnout. And people have mentioned about having interest in things outside of work, which is crucially important. But there are things that you can really do that are really beneficial to your nervous system. Personally, I find that exercise is a fantastic stress reliever. Make yourself sweat every day, and generally, I find that you know, stress is much more manageable later in life as I got older. And I'm a natural skeptic. Anything I see as woo-woo is of generally no interest to me. But it's only over the past few years that I've personally found things like meditation is genuinely helpful. A process of quieting, learning to quiet the mind and giving yourself space to process certain experiences and emotions is critically important, and there are skills that can be learned. So you know, if it's not something you've tried before, there's a ton of content on YouTube. I'm not saying dive headlong into the woo-woo of the self-help industry, but there's a lot of interesting things that I personally found incredibly helpful and helps me to sort of manage my stress, and that ultimately makes me a happier person, and you know, makes my work infinitely more enjoyable.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Stuart, I can see you got your hand up.
Cheers. So in the pen test world, as a rule of thumb, employers are not going to expect you to work beyond the hours that you're employed to work. And certainly where the company I work for, that's very, very clear. What you may find happens is that you become quite interested in something you're working on. And I think we've all been there where it was 5 p.m. and it's now 11 p.m. and we've spent the last 6 hours trying to fix something or exploit something or get something working. But there's never a sense of duty about that. It's a sense of personal interest. So to Matt's point about the difference between, I think it was Matt's point, anyway, it's a very good point, the difference between burnout and hours. Spending a long time focusing on something that interests you doesn't automatically mean there is a problem with it. Where there are roles where you are expected to do that, so again, the others on the call are far more qualified to speak about this than me, but where there is a 4-on 4-off style shift rota, or there's an on-call system where you're expected to be available, that's part of a contract and agreement that you sign. And again, as was mentioned earlier, there is a responsibility on you to manage your own time and expectations. The only time I find where there can sometimes be encroachment is where you're working on a job where that can happen and it's outside your control. So for example, a regulated red team I did recently for a bank in another country, because of the time zone differences and the fact that they only accessed the file that I needed them to access at 6 p.m. my time, then meant that we gained access to a particular section of the network that we'd been hoping for about a week. And that happened on a Friday evening. So a lot of us chose to just spend our evening making the progress that we wanted to, not because there was any boss standing around saying that we had to and our jobs were at risk, but because we were interested and we chose to do that. So you will find that happens, and that is okay. But if you find yourself working for a company where you are being routinely expected to work outside your hours and it's affecting your mental health, then you definitely either need to speak to them or resign and go somewhere else, because I don't know any credible companies that have that attitude. In fact, there is a very, very huge, fairly recently actually, there's been a lot more of an understanding and acceptance of mental health, stress and pressure, and a lot of companies, including mine, have put a lot of support in place, and that's been really good. It's only happened in the last, I'd say, 6, 12, 18 months maybe, but that's been very positive, so I wouldn't worry about it too much.
That's great, thank you very much. And Matt, you've got your hand up. Is that from last time, or did you want to just say a couple of extra words on that one?
Yes, Stu just really triggered something that I think is critically important, not just in this context, but in life in general, in any job, is most people find that life is a lot easier with a solid routine. Get 8 hours of sleep a night, generally. Establish good habits. It makes a hell of a difference. I had terrible habits as a student. That sandwich I had helped somewhat, but it's again something that I had to I personally had to learn. There's a ton of content online about this, but which you can look up and give you a much more sort of eloquent pathway of establishing these things than I could do right now. But yeah, don't overlook the effectiveness and indeed the simplicity of setting a good routine and the impact that has. That it really can be a game changer in not just your work, but your life in general.
Yeah, so some very good information there. And Sava, you've got your hand up.
Literally just to back Matt there, to be honest. Having graduated this year, the first month and a half, when it sunk in that I was working 40 hours a week after thinking that what I was doing at university was like a full-time gig, and I was hopelessly searching for what was wrong with work that was making me like less happy. And it was that I was still going to bed when I would have gone to bed as a student and doing the things I would have done when I was a student. It really is a monumental shift, or at least it was for me. And I think I was actually concerned about becoming boring, and that's why I fended off having a schedule. But there is something like really exciting about getting into the gym, eating well, knowing when you're working, getting up early. You get to wake up early, get a few more hours of sunlight out of most of the year, and I think, at least for anyone who enjoys uni in that way, that's something you can definitely still do, but just work can be a lot more fun if you don't fight it, and if you don't fight how fun and exploratory work can be. And I think that if you box it in from 9 to 5, and then you like throw your phone across the room when you're finished with the day and then don't think about it and go out and pretend to be 18, then you're probably not going to find it as fun. And then when you do inevitably have to do a little bit more work, you're going to hate it. Whereas like I do find myself coming back, which I think is it's a privilege, but I find myself coming back to work at the weekend because I kind of want to do it as opposed to having to do it. But I'll also take the opportunity to reiterate what Stuart said. If you're actually just being harassed into working outside of paid hours, you're just not at the right company. I think crunch is more the surfacing of a bad relationship to your own time if it's not an exploitative company. And then sometimes you need to sit down and kind of think about, where am I giving my time? Am I lying in bed on TikTok till 1:30 and then waking up at 6? Or am I functionally eating well, sleeping well, exercising, going outside, stretching, like not just staring at the screen? Like once you've got all that balance in place, then you can start to look at kind of, whether this is the relationship you want to have with your labor and your time. And it's also okay, I'll just add to like, it is okay to, and you will be able to engage with this industry if you're really strict about when you're working and when you're not working. It's not an all or nothing deal. It's just that there are always going to be people in the space who will go that extra mile, and that you need to be mindful of that as and when you're kind of engaging with the people in industry and the work you might be doing.
That's great. Thank you very much. I would like to get in one more question just before we finish. And it was just around, we had a question in to talk about junior DFIR positions and compare those to junior pen testing roles. And the person here was saying that, it's a competitive market right now, and they're actually on the fence between DFIR and pen testing, and they would like some persuading arguments of which way they should go. Has anybody got any persuading arguments to send them perhaps in a direction that they would like to go? It's gone very quiet.
I guess I can speak for the defence, which in this context is DFIR. Why I think as you enter into the industry, and I believe it was Matt who was making this point earlier, or perhaps it was Ollie, but don't silo yourself. The best defenders know about offensive security these days. You can't defend an organization without knowing a little bit about attack. And obviously, you mentioned DFIR specifically and forensics. Yes, there are of course still dedicated forensics roles out there, but it's the industry is still really young, and it's changed a lot, particularly in the past 10 years. And although forensics obviously does happen, I think a lot of sort of general analysis is labeled forensics when indeed it isn't. It's just analysis these days, because things like the human operated ransomware is one example. If you're dealing with a live attacker that hasn't deployed their ransomware payload, if they're even going to get to that point, they might have a slightly different objective. But if you're going in there expecting to bag and tag evidence and take it back to base and spend time looking through it, the attacker's going to be long gone before you've even started to get to an answer. So forensics is often a smaller topic within a wider subject area here. So I would say defense, there's a rich rich knowledge base to follow back on. It's to learn. It can be a real enhancement to your career, and it could indeed lead to an interesting and fruitful career on the offensive side. I think, and the opposite is also true. So yeah, don't constrain yourself. More and more, security is a team effort, and that's across the whole spectrum these days.
That's great. Thank you very much, Matt. And over to you, Ollie.
I feel like the support for the DFIR side is probably a little too much at the moment, because I don't hear anyone chipping in from the pen test side. Matt stole a lot of my thunder and the same things that I was going to say around having an understanding and appreciation of the offensive side to make you a better defender. What I would say is that the key challenge that particularly people who are relatively new to the DFIR side of things, a lot of the challenges I've found with people who are relatively early in their career in DFIR is you need to come into every investigation that you're involved in with the understanding that quite often you're not going to be able to find all the answers. There are a huge number of reasons why you may not be able to trace a full attack path from, as in using Matt's analogy there, from a bad actor deploying ransomware in an organization's environment to that patient zero as to how they got in. I think the key thing you need to think of from the DFIR perspective, it's massively satisfying to be able to piece together some of these kind of particularly complex intrusions. Massively satisfying to kind of dig into how adversaries are behaving on a network. But a lot of people, or maybe not a lot of people, but some people have a real kind of mental block and a real challenge around the unknown unknowns. There's the things that, because there's no data, because a particular system's been powered off and the disk's been wiped, because someone's laptop has been left on a train, we simply can't find the answer to. So from my side, I would agree with everything Matt said. It's massively satisfying that the incident response space is, but you need to go into it understanding that in no investigation will you manage to identify every piece of evidence. You won't be able to bag and tag everything. You need to be able to understand that it'll never be a perfect, complete puzzle piece for you.
That's great, thank you. And I'll hand over to Boglarka, I'm sure is coming in from the pen testing corner.
Thank you, Debbie. Actually, I was going to say, from my point of view, there's actually so many commonalities between digital forensics and pen testing, right? I mean, you were talking about the that massive satisfaction that comes from piecing things together, but actually the same applies when you're doing a pen test and when you come really close to exploiting a vulnerability, or when you are able to kind of identify a vulnerability in a web app or in an infrastructure, and it's that kind of I don't know what the proper term for this is. Apologies, English is not my first language. It's that hunter's instinct when you get on a trail and when you actually push forward and find a breakthrough and get that feeling of success with your breakthrough. And for both digital forensics and penetration testing, I think the key to this, or the driver, is that inquisitive mindset that you go into whatever the objective of your assessment is, and try to dig up and try to find correlations between two bits that aren't necessarily seemingly related to each other. So I actually think from this point of view, you can certainly choose both. And you don't necessarily need to pick one or the other. There's obviously some specifics that are more prominent in digital forensics, and some others that are more prominent to penetration testing. But I think both are actually really good options as long as you enjoy it.
That's great. Thank you very much there, Boglarka. And I'm very sorry we have come to the end, but there is one thing that I am going to do before I thank everybody for attending and thank our panelists today. We had one question in. I have put my camera on, and that question is that a pufferfish floating above your head, Debbie? Does it have a name? So yes, it is a pufferfish that is floating above my head, and no, it doesn't have a name. So I am more than happy for anybody, if they'd like to name my pufferfish, to send me through what they would like to call it. That will be absolutely fine. And then the next careers evening, the pufferfish will make an appearance again with its name badge on, so it will be fine. So thank you for that. So I'd like to say thank you so much to all our panelists today for being here to impart their knowledge and to answer all your questions. And thank you so much as well for everybody that's attended today. I would like to just hand over to Adriana, if she would just like to say a last few words. And Adriana's email has been put in the chat for everyone if you want to get in touch about the student community, and we've also put the marketing one on there for any questions that perhaps weren't asked to our panelists. So yes, I will just hand over to Adriana. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you to all our panelists for a fantastic evening, and thank you for all of you who are attending. And I'm sure you really enjoyed and benefited immensely from all the presentations. So thank you very much, Debbie and the team and everybody else. And it was great. And the recording will be available for those who missed, or if you want to listen to anything again. And also the questions, as you must have seen in the chat, you can submit to marketing@crest-approved.org, and you will be getting back to you. So once again, thank you, everybody, and a good evening to all. Bye-bye now.
Thank you very much. Take care and have a good evening.
Bye-bye. Good luck.
Thanks all.
Bye, everybody. Best of luck.
Bye. Bye all.
Bye.